Hello everyone, my name is Aruni Kashyap and I'm a writer and translator, and I am tuning in from Athens, Georgia. We have a very wonderful bunch of Assamese writers today with me. I love their work and they are all included in this wonderful anthology called How to Tell the Story of an Insurgency. This is an anthology published by HarperCollins India. I edited it. It was a long process and it has been an exciting journey since its publication. The book came out in February and soon after that the world went to a standstill. But we have refused to give up and we have continued to talk about the book, spread the word about the book, because these are very, very important stories that the world should know. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome the panel, and I'm going to briefly introduce, and as I read out a little bit about you for the audience, if you could just wave your hand, or you can also go to the reactions tab and do a thumbs up like this, so that people know who I am introducing. But also I think on the screen the names are pretty clear. But either way, I'm going to start. My first panelist today is Dr. Hafiz Ahmed, and he's the author, editor, and translator of 15 books in Assamese. He's a poet and short story writer, and also the president of the Sar Sapuri Literary Council, a literary body that supports and promotes Assamese language and literature among the riverine islands of Assam, where mostly Assamese-speaking Muslims of Bengal origin live. In 2016, Hafizda introduced Mia poetry. My next panelist is Dr. Ratnutama Das Bikram. Ratnutama Das Bikram is a professor of Assamese literature at the Department of Modern Indian Languages and Literary Studies. She writes fiction in Assamese, and she's the author of 2 books and called Horiguno Kohono Najai, a historical novel, and also Nok Norokha Salibur, which means actually girls who don't grow their nails long. Pahiba, who I dearly call Ratnutama Das Bikram, I call her with a lot of love Pahiba, because I have known her since I was a kid. It's very hard for me to call her Ratnutama, by the way, so I call her Pahiba. So Pahiba will tell us about girls who don't want to keep long nails later, and we'll be delighted, along with her short story. I also have Sanjeeb Paul Deka, my dear friend. Sanjeeb is an assistant professor at the Department of Assamese, Tezpur University. He has recently joined. In the book, it mentions that he was part of Dibrugarh University, because that was the right information then. But he has moved places, moved jobs, and he has joined Tezpur University in the Department of Assamese. He's also the winner of the Sahitya Academy Juba Puraskar 2019 for his short story collection Epine Kiase. The title story of Epine Kiase is actually translated for this collection. He's also the editor of Alap, a magazine published from Guwahati. He can tell us more about Alap and what he does probably later. Next and finally, I have Juri Borua. Juri Borua is a feminist geographer, currently working on gender, environment, and displacement. After completing her master's in geography from Delhi School of Economics, she is pursuing her PhD from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Her short story collection, Babylona Din, Babylona Rati, was published in 2016. Juri has also recently joined, so congratulations, as an assistant professor at Debicharan Borua Mohabidaloy under Dibrugarh University. So congratulations on the new job and the new journey. Thank you for joining us, all of you. I want to start first by requesting Dr. Hafiz Ahmed to read the first paragraph of his short story from the original Assamese version. Hafiz Da.
The name of my story is Yaur Masteror Smarak Patro, the memorandum of Yaur Master. Manujane hahi hahi kole, moi nelir manu, বদ্ধভূমি নেলির 18 ফেব্রুৱাৰী 83 চনৰ কথা আপোনাৰ নিশ্চয় মনত আছে। মই আচৰিত হৈ মানুহজনৰ ফালে চালো। বয়স 60 বছৰ মানে হ'ব চাগে। বয়সৰ তুলনাত মানুহজন কিন্তু বেছ সবল সুঠাম হৈ আছে। মেৰুদণ্ড পোন কৰিয়ে বহি লৈছে সোফাত। চকুতো চশমা নাই। তাৰ মানে দৃষ্টিশক্তি তেওঁৰ এতিয়াও অটুট আছে। মই কলো পিছে মোৰ কাষলৈ কি ভাবিলো মানুহজন যেনেকৈ আছিল তেনেকৈ বহিয়ে থাকিল কুমনীয়া এটা কাঢ়ি কলে পাখণ্ডহঁতে মোৰ ডেকা ল'ৰা দুজনক হত্যা কৰিছিল সৰুজনৰ ডেড বডিয়ে বিচাৰি নাপালো ডাঙৰ ল'ৰাজনৰ বিয়া
I'm worried we have lost Hafizda's connection. I'm going to give it a few seconds to come back. If he doesn't come back, we will go to Pahiba and request her to address Hafizda. There was a problem with the network, but we heard most of what you read. So thank you so much for reading. That was wonderful to hear it in your voice in Assamese because I have been here. You know, I haven't heard it in your voice. I have only spoken to you as a translator of that short story. Hafizda, I'm going to ask you the first question. You know, Nelly is such a incredibly sad memory in India's psyche, definitely in Assam's psyche. It is hard to write about it. I have read, but there is also a series of novels about it. One of the most famous ones definitely is Sohaib Abdul Malik's Moi Morinu Na Jao Kya. And there are a couple of other depictions of Nelly. But you have written a short story, you know, and I find it interesting because Nelly is such a big event. People tend to write longer narratives around Nelly. So in short, basically, I'm trying to ask you what really sort of inspired you, pushed you to write this short story, or as we say in Assamese, Golpor Arar Kotha Ki Asile.
The thing is that since 1983, when the tragic incident of Nelly happened, actually we were studying in college. When we got university, I was studying in Guwahati University. For the first time, I visited Nelly in 1985. And I was shocked to know that there was a mass graveyard. And in that mass graveyard, 587 people were put into the graves. I was very much sorry. Since then, I visited Nelly now and then, talked with the people of that area. And those people wanted nothing. They told me that we want only justice. We don't want compensation even. And they told me another thing, that they want that those who committed this massacre, they should beg forgive from us because they branded us to be Bangladeshi, and we are not Bangladeshi, we are very much Assamese. So all these things, it was in my memory since 1983, and that memory and the discussion I had with the people of Nelly, that inspired me to write this short story.
So Giaru Master, the short story that Hafizda wrote for this anthology, Giaru Master's Memorandum. In this short story, Giaru Master is a person who has started a signature campaign for the Nelly genocide victims, and the story is about this very interesting character who goes from door to door collecting signatures, and I think. That apology, that acknowledgement can go such a long way in healing the many traumas that are part of Assam. So thank you for writing that short story. I want to move on to Dr. Ratnadama Das Bikram, or my dear Pahiba. Pahiba, I literally bullied you to write this short story. So I know what you are going to say in answer when I say, what is your Golpor Arar Kotha? You would say that Aruni Kashyap bullied me into writing this short story. But there is more to that. I bullied you because you shared some personal memories, you shared some anecdotes from your childhood. And I know all of that, but I think the audience would be very, very, very happy to know what went behind the composition of this short story.
Thank you, Aruni. And I don't think you bullied me, you teased me, of course. You forced me. Actually, you forced me to write the story, that I must say, because you knew the story behind the story. And that is something personal, but I'd love to share it. During that time, 90s, I was an early 80s born person, and of course, my schooling was during the 90s. So during that time, I'm in the 90s, I was this teenager girl, and there was this guy, non-Assamese. But they were more Assamese than many years. Well, this guy and our schoolmates started teasing us. That was the sweet, cute teenage love story beginning. And what happened? The boy belonged to the Marwari community, and they are basically from Rajasthan, but staying in Assam and many places of India. So Aruni knows this part. What happened during this insurgency? Many Marwari people, they were forced to leave Assam, and this guy was also an unfortunate one. He was also forced to do so with his family. So this was the beginning, and this is the reason Aruni is telling that he believed me, not exactly believed, he forced me. That he said that there are many stories behind the story, and more stories are there, not small stories, because he was forced to leave Assam. One uncle was killed by the insurgents. One uncle, not the father, actually the uncle. But in my story, I twisted and I said that the father was killed, the boy's father. Actually, that's a real story. That girl is me, and Aruni is none other than my friend, my very good friend, who is settled in Jaipur now. So this was the very briefly, this is the story behind the story. And being a 90s, 80s kid or 90s kid, pursuing my schooling in 90s, I faced all this thing. I was a witness. I witnessed all this incident, and it was like a part of my childhood, part of my early teenage years and my teenage years. So basically, this is the story very briefly. But there is one more point. I must say that my maternal uncle or my maternal grandparents' place is just 5 kilometers away from my small town. I'm from a very small town, and that's a village, my grandparents' village. And that village was full of, you can say, insurgents, so-called quote-unquote insurgents. They were like my own mama, like maternal uncles. I knew stories from them. They were, I can say, they were alpha, the alpha mama. So there are many. So I knew many stories. I knew so many emotions involved in it. So many stories I was carrying inside me. Still I am carrying. So definitely, briefly, these 2 points: my childhood story, my teenage story, me being a teenager falling in love with a, yes, I can use the word love, a sweet, cute love story with a this guy, and then my maternal grandparents' place and my involvement with the village. So these 2 are the main and major reasons.
I want to share an anecdote. You know, these panels that I have been organizing, it has become this amazing space where people have actually shared memories of growing up under those dark years in the 90s, especially most of us 90s. You know, there was a Hindi speaker friend who originally from Bihar, but this guy was who was a common friend, was born and brought up in Guwahati. Because of all the violence on Hindi-speaking people, he left, and I was friends with him because he used to read Prantik, the Assamese magazine, and you know, many months later, I got a call from him, and he said, "Can you get me a subscription of Prantik? I live in this remote village in Bihar. Obviously, Prantik doesn't come. I'll money order you the money." And I cannot just even now when I think about that incident, it gives me heartbreak and goosebumps. Pahiba, you want to say something, and then I'll come to Sanjeev and then to Julie.
Yeah, because Aruni has told about his friends, it reminds me of many stories, many incidents. This friend of mine, who was with me in my high school, his own sister, was a Bihu Kori or Mo Kori. She danced Bihu so well. She used to win all the prizes in our, not only in our area, but nearby areas. So she was a Bihu Kori. So imagine, she was so Assamese that she used to win the competitions. And this guy, he was so involved with Assam and the language. She literally wept in front of our friends, not only in front of me, but a group of friends. It literally wept that I don't want to go to Jaipur. I don't want to go and study there. How can I study there? I don't know Hindi or English. Of course, he knew Hindi or English, but he was afraid of studying in that medium because he was comfortable studying in Assamese medium, who was my friend. And imagine my situation. Imagine I was a very young girl, young adult, very young. teenager girl, and I couldn't do anything. One murder was already happened, one very close uncle's murder. So we all were afraid. So you can imagine the situation. I just wanted to add these to your points, to your stories about your friend. That's what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. And I think these tragic memories actually tell us that Assamese is a community and identity that is always in flux. It is we are still forming who we are, and suddenly because of the extremism and the narrow ideas of nationalism, we have been splintered and divided. Sanjeev, there is a reference to Assam agitation in your story, very brief reference. There's also, your story is primarily set in the 90s against the secret killings of Assam. And my first novel was actually, but set against the secret killings of Assam. And I think you would agree with me that the secret killings were your and my childhood, isn't it?
Yes.
And so in some ways, you wrote about actually the experience of you growing up in the 90s in Assam as a young boy. So could you talk about how you came to write this story? And if I remember, this story was initially published as a upanyahika, as a novella, as a very tiny, I would say novelette, as a novelette, because there's that word that exists in English. I don't know if there's a word for novelette in Assamese, but it was a tiny upanyahika, small upanyahika in Ahombani, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is when I read the short story, and I told you that I would love to include it in this anthology. And obviously, over the years, that short story became part of your collection. Then that collection was published as Epine Kiyase. The short story became a title story. You won the Yuva Sahitya Academy Puraskar for it. So it has been a long journey. But please tell us about that moment when you started writing that story.
Thank you, Arodi. You rightly mentioned about our childhood days, and yes, I was inspired by my childhood days and childhood experience. So, like many other boys and girls of our age, I was brought up in an Assamese village in Durham district that witnessed the manifold impact of Assam agitation, 1979 to 1985. In the post-Assam agitation years, specifically from 1991 to 2001, our childhood and adolescence saw the many phases and phases of Alpha, United Liberation Front of Assam. So I can still feel the sense of terror that I felt the morning when I saw a number of army vehicles nearby our village. That was the winter of 1996. I can still remember. And even today, when I hear the sound of a puncture of a wheel of a bus or truck, I feel the terror that I felt the evening when we heard the sound of bomb blasting in the roadside of our neighboring village. So I remember that was the month of February 1997. The army camp which intimidated our school days time to time used to stay in the backside of our high school from 1996 to 2001. So meanwhile, sometimes I saw the armed Alpha cadres in our locality, and one of them was very close to our family. We have family relations, and we belong to the same family, same Suburi ward. So in 1997, that Alpha cadre who had family connection with us, he had to face an encounter with BSF in Nalbari district. And as his ammunition ran out, he committed suicide. He tried to commit suicide by shooting himself. So we ran towards his home as soon as the news spread through all India radio. The crying of his mother touched everyone's heart. So in the afternoon, 5 people, including my father, went in a hired Maruti van. That time people used that particular vehicle to Nalbari to bring his dead body. But as they reached the police station, they were informed that he was alive in a very critical condition and he was admitted to Guwahati Medical College. As I, then a student of class 6 or 7, I also visited him in the medical. So returning from hospital, he tried to live a very normal life. But I came to know that at that time, he was often called upon by the local army camp and to become involved in their operations. So this experience of childhood was the inspiration behind this story.
Thank you for sharing that with us, because I think the story of the surrendered militant or the returned militant or the militant who had returned to the mainstream after being pardoned by the government um, is part of the 90s story, that led to the growth of the nouveau rich in Assam. All the malls came up because of it. Newspapers were published because of it. Channels were funded. So Assam kind of reached a new sense of economic liberalization along with the involvement of Salfa or the surrendered militants or any other kind of surrendered militants in the economy. It changed the politics of Assam. But I think the most tragic thing that happened was that the surrendered militant could never really return to the mainstream. They lived forever very guarded. They always feared for their lives. They were used as pawns by the government repeatedly to turn against their former militants. They were repeatedly sought information. So I think you bring out the tragedy and the push and pull very well in your short story, and that speaks to the tragedy of numerous people, who actually surrendered. They wanted to lead a normal life, a life of anonymity, but they were never allowed. Judy, I want to come to you right now, and the reason I included your short story is because you refused realism as a mode of depiction. We are all realistic writers here. I have written magic realism a little bit, but we are all in some ways realistic. We write in a realist mode, but you refused that, and you went to the figurative, the metaphoric realm, and yet your story is definitely a political tale, at a Rajnoitik Golpo, as you title it. But it is so much more than that. It encaptures the entire gamut of things that have happened in Assam in a short story. So I call your story a Jolokia bomb, and I don't want to translate that to anybody else. So please tell us about this chili bomb, Jolokia bomb.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Thank you.
Thank you, Arunita. Actually, when I read the story again, to prepare for this meeting, then I feel that this is not exactly the story which I want to tell. The story behind the story, as Pahiba has already mentioned, were more important for me now, but not during that time, because I have written this story in 2016. I have remembered the day. During that time, I was a MPhil student in this, but mostly I'm available, during that time near to the Diguri Pukri or near Ambari, with some of my other friends who were protesting on different issues in Assam, especially in the context of peasants movement or in the context of some other kinds of protests. So on a particular day in 2016, I was actually attending a kind of protest, and then I have remembered that I have to travel to Tesco University to present a paper, research paper, which is quite related to my MPhil thesis. And I just remembered that, and I have traveled to the university, and that was my first visit to Tesco University. So I have traveled alone. So the road which lead me to the university campus, it's just like a metaphor for me, because I feel that some of my friends who were protesting on different political issues related to Assam, they were coming from those kind of families where their parents have raised some other kinds of issues, and which are also related to our generation. I'm also a 90s kid, so I feel that they have that kind of aggression. But during that time, maybe I don't know how to tell a story, very politely or very, as you have told. I think you have that skill. But during that time, I don't feel that I have the skill of, describing a story more, easily understandable for my readers. So it is a kind of very metaphor for me, and I feel that the character which I used here, it is not a single character. It is, it is a bunches of characters which I have collected from my friends, from my family, from my experience in the university where I presented the paper. So there are lots of other characters which are get together in one character that is called Orenno. And I have used Orenno as a metaphor to describe the political situation during that time and how it is important for the new generation people. Because I feel that, during that time I was a little bit depressed person because of this political imbalance. So that was the story behind of this particular story, a political tale. But I feel today that that the story behind the stories are more important for me now, because these questions are so valid till today also. Yeah.
So you want to bring out the personal stories, the human, the character should, you feel that the character, you want to put the characters on the forefront, on the
exactly.
right now, and let them tell their story instead of dealing it in a metaphorical way.
Yes, because the publisher wants to publish the second edition for this book, and then I have to check, I have to correct some of the stories from this collection. So then I feel that there are lots of other characters which I missed, in this particular story. But still, this story is very close to my heart, because there are lots of the characters which I feel during that time are very important for the political metaphor. But ideologically, they are not important now. So that is the dichotomy of this entire metaphor which I have used.
But I think it's very important for writers to be able to convey things in different ways, because the moment, one of the reasons I also wanted to include your story, and because most of the time there's a pressure on the writer from Assam, a fraught, racialized, militarized, misunderstood place, to actually write a certain kind of story, that we should be writing about what is available to the mainlanders, so the mainlanders understand us through the lens of military violence, bomb blasts, so they expect us to tell these stories. But there are possibilities of Assamese writers writing horror stories, erotica, love stories, metaphorical stories, satire, everything, or historical stories, or even stories of reincarnation in the tradition of Kansan Borua's Okima Dahel Schema. I think we have the right to tell any kind of story, and we should not be pressured by the mainstream publishing houses to only write a certain kind of story. And I think we should not fall into the trap. So as an Assamese writer and editor, I wanted your story to be also an answer to many of these questions, because you're not the only one who is writing this story. Even Ponsanan Hazarika's new collection that came out during the lockdown, he has a short story there, Hopunar Dore. If you can remind me, he's a friend.
Yes.
He has selected what was the name of the book? Watahotkoy Swadhin. Yes, absolutely. And the title story in that collection actually is somewhat similar to your story, because he's also trying to capture the entire 30-40 years of Assam's history through only a very few symbolic representative characters. So I find it very interesting that people in this generation, who are slightly probably younger than me, are trying to understand this in different ways, not just through gritty, bloody realism, and falling into the pressures of the mainstream expectations. And I think to be able to write in Assamese for an Assamese audience in the Assamese print culture is a very different kind of liberated space as well in some ways, because you are not mediated into the publication process through an editor sitting in Delhi. So I think those are important concerns, and I think reading Assamese literature in Assamese languages, in Assamese periodicals, I think enables us to understand this. And my familiarity with all these journals and publication history I remember I reading your short story in Hathori magazine.
Yes.
And
But during that time, the readers were very unhappy because they don't understand the inner meaning of that story.
Right.
I didn't receive the positive comments for that story. But after 2-3 years, I have received some comments that this was a good story, in terms of using metaphors, or it is not a realistic one, but it has different angles to say about that political.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made the readers unhappy. I think we should occasionally make our readers unhappy. We should not always make them happy, right? We should allow them to disagree with us. I want to come back to a reading now. We have dealt with the first question. Pahiba, will you please read the first paragraph of your short story in Assamese? And then we will come to Jury, who will read the first paragraph of your short story in Assamese. And then I'll go ahead with the question about the writing process. Pahiba, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. My story, that is actually, okay. Title of my story is Belir Ronga, Tezor Ronga. Dada? Oi Dada. Osorota hui thoka kokaekok tai ফুসফুসাই দুবার মাটিও কোনো উত্তৰ নাপালে। তাই এবাৰ কিলাকুটিত ভৰ দি ডিঙি মেলি ককায়েক টোপনি গ'ল নেকি চাবৰ চেষ্টা কৰিলে। কাষৰ কোঠাটোত কেৰাচিন তেলৰ লেম এটা জ্বলি আছে। ফুট সন্ধিয়াৰে পৰা জ্বলি জ্বলি এতিয়ালৈ সেইটোৰ চিচাৰ চিমনিটোৰ আধামান ধোঁৱাই ক'লা কৰি পেলোৱাৰ কাৰণে তাৰ হেতা হালধীয়া পোহৰখিনি আৰু বেছি হেতা হৈ পৰিছে। তাৰে পৰা এই শুৱনি কোঠাটোৱে ধাৰ কৰা পোহৰৰ অলপমান আঠুৱাখনৰ মাজেৰে সোমাই আহি তাই ককায়েকৰ মুখতো পৰিছে। তা পোহৰৰ ছয়াময়াৰ মাজতো তাই দেখিলে ককায়েকৰ চকুটা তকৈ মেল খাই আছে। ককায়েক সাৰে থকা বুলি জানিও তাই আকৌ ফুচফুচাই সুধিলে, ঐ দাদা, টোপনি গলি নেকি? সি ওপৰমুৱাকৈ শুই চিলিঙলৈ চাই কিবা ভাবি আছিল। চিলিংখন কাঠৰ, তাতে ইন্দুকোট তেল লগাই কেঁতুৰ কলা ৰং কৰা আছে। লেমৰ ক্ষীণ পোহৰত আঠুৱাৰ মাজেৰে এতিয়া অৱশ্যে চিলিংখন একেবাৰে দেখা পোৱা নাই। আন্ধাৰৰ লগত একাকাৰ হৈ আছে। সি মুখখন ভনীয়েকৰ ফালে ঘূৰালে। তাইৰ মুখত কাষৰ কোঠাৰ লেমৰ ধাৰ কৰা পোহৰ নাই পৰা বাবে তাইৰ মুখখনো আন্ধাৰত মিলি আছে। অনুমানতে তাইৰ মুখৰ ফালে চাই সি সৰুকৈ ক'লে, তয়ো খোৱা নাই? আহ, কি যে সুধি থাকে এই পেকপেকীজনীয়ে। খোৱা নাই বুলি তাই চোন গম পাইছে। তথাপি এই মুহূৰ্তত তাইৰ লগত লাগি ল'বৰ মন নাই তাৰ। তাই আকৌ একেটা কথাকে সুধিলে। তাইৰ মুখখন তাৰ কাণৰ আৰু অলপ ওচৰ চাপি আহিল। ওপৰলৈ চাই থাকিয়ে সি উচ্চাৰণ কৰিলে, একেটা শব্দতে দিয়া তাৰ উত্তৰটো শুনি তাই আৰু কি কব এক মুহূৰ্ত ভাবি আকৌ ফুচফুচাই সুধিলে, তোৰো বাৰু ভৰি বিষাইছেনে? নাই, নাই বিষোৱা, কিয় বিষাব? সি ভনীয়েকক বোকাত মিছা কথা এটা তপৰাই ক'লে। আচলতে তাৰ ভৰি বিষাইছিল। কলা ফুল আৰু উৰুৰ মাংসপেশীবোৰ টানি টানি ধৰিছিল। ভৰি নিবিষাব কিয়? সিহঁত দুটাই আজি যিমান দূৰ খোজ কাঢ়িলে সিমান দূৰ কিজানি এটাইও আজিলৈকে খোজকাঢ়ি পোৱা নাছিল। তাতে আকৌ সিহঁত খোজকাঢ়িবলগীয়া হৈছিল দুয়ো কাষে দূৰণিলৈ পথাৰে আগুৰি থকা ওখৰা মুখৰা গাঁৱলীয়া আলি বাটটোৰেদি। 12-13 জনীয়া ডেকা গাভৰুৰ দলটোৰ মাজত মাত্ৰ সিহঁত দুটাই আছিল সৰু ল'ৰা ছোৱালী। ইমানে হ'বনে আৰু নে? Will it be enough?
Thank you so much, because it really took me back to the early moments when I read your story first in your handwriting, and of course to the village of Assam. I will come to you first after I ask Hafizda to talk about the writing process, but I want to talk to you about the writing process because I think we both were very involved in the writing process, a lot of discussions. So Hafizda, you have written so many books. You can probably tell our audience and all of us, how do you write your short stories? What is your writing process like? So your answer doesn't necessarily have to be about Giaur Master's memorandum, but you can generally talk about your writing process of writing short stories. I think young writers like us will be very, very benefited from that.
Yes?
We can hear you now.
Oh. No, actually, I write my short stories from the experience which I gather from my life, particularly from the life of my community. You see, I was born and brought up in Borpeta district in one Sapori area, riverine area, and I have seen that society very clearly. The society is crystal clear before my eyes. I have seen the problems faced by those people. Secondly, after my graduation, I shifted myself to Guwahati and I am working in South Kamrup. I have seen the society which is called the Indigenous Society of Assam, that society also, and I have been able to compare these two societies, and most of my short stories are, you can say 70-75% short stories are based on that society which we call Bengal origin Assamese Muslim. That society, their problem, their citizenship, their poverty, riverbank erosion, all this. And I recollect all this from my memory, what I saw, and still I am having my relation with that society. It is very often I used to visit those society. I see how the people are suffering from flood, how the people are suffering from riverbank erosion, all this, and how to dare to face the foreign tribunals. All these problems comes to my mind, and sometimes I write them. Regarding this story, I have already told how I have gathered experience regarding this story, and I don't write. Whenever I gather some experience, I just note down that this is the name. Sometimes I put even the real name in my short stories. I note down in my diary that such and such incident had happened in such and such place. Then when I get time, when I have enough time, I used to elaborate that theme, and my short stories are written. In this manner, I used to write. But sometimes I do feel, I think I shall tell all these what challenges I face. I shall tell later on.
No, please go ahead. I think we would like to know at least a few challenges that you faced while writing about these communities and these themes and how you tackle them.
No, you see, very often there is ethnic cleansing. There is killing of some people in Assam, whether it is Bengal origin Assamese Muslim, whether it is Adivasis or some other communities. Such incidents happens. And you know, my first, regarding this short story, Jiaur Master's memorandum, when I wanted to write this short story, my first reaction was, what will be the reaction of the readers? How they will take my short story? And another question that came to my mind was that whether any newspaper or magazines will publish this short story. But because this kind of short story is not available in Assamese literature. So far my knowledge was only Soid Abdul Malik wrote 6 short stories on the massacres, and Udayaditya Bharati sir, he wrote one short story. So I had to think, who will publish this? Then I sent, after writing this short story, then one thing happened. I was thinking about all this, about the challenges. Then the Basbari massacre of 1994 happened. Then I thought that there is, regarding Nelly, there was political impunity. Nobody was punished. No justice was given. If the criminals, I'm saying criminals of the Nelly massacre, even 1 or 2, they were provided token punishment, then I think 1994 Nelly massacre or 2008, 2012, which is continuing, that would have not happened in Assam. So I was to be very much cautious writing. I sent to one daily newspaper and one famous magazine of Assam my short story, but it was not published. Then it was published from one magazine from Hujai. And then it was included in my anthology. Another thing is there. While writing this short story, I have to be very cautious so that I don't hurt the emotion of anybody. But at the same time, I can raise the question of justice, the question of political impunity, all this. So, while writing a short story, even while composing a poem in Assam, you know, you are to be very cautious so that you don't hurt the sentiment, emotions of anybody.
Nowadays, people get hurt very easily. We have become very sensitive people. So people get hurt very easily, Hafizda, nowadays. But I think Hafizda brings us some of the very important issues about writing in a highly intolerant space, in a highly fractured place. And most importantly, that I learned from what Hafizda has told us is the immense documentary value that your stories have, that you actually sometimes even don't change the names, or while you take notes, you actually take down the locations and the date and so on. I'm really greedy, so I'm going to ask you one last question, and and I don't want to comment too much because I want to hear from you. I want you to very briefly talk about your literary citizenship. It is not just that you are trying to represent these underrepresented issues, these stories that when you send to Assamese editors who become uncomfortable and don't publish possibly, but you are also very good, very dedicated literary citizen in your community. You have started the Sar Sapori Sahitya Porikhod, and I want you to tell us very briefly about this Sahitya Porikhod and what kind of work do they do.
Actually, regarding Sar Sapori Sahitya Porikhod, it was seen in 1991 that some NGOs coming from West Bengal, they came to provide flood relief, particularly in Badbor and Zonia constituency. They told, while distributing relief, they told our people, I mean Bangalore is an Assamese Muslim, that you were Bengalis, why you are writing Assamese as your mother tongue. Then I discussed this with Dr. Hiren Guhai sir, Dr. Monirul Hussain, Professor Abdul Mannan and others, that what can be done. So that census went on. In 2001, also the same thing happened. Then in 2001, when this happened, we thought of forming some literary organization which will work for the spreading as well as you can say the obstruct the way of Bengali chauvinism in the Sar Saporis. Then in 2005, there was a convention in Guwahati, and the president of that convention in that meeting was Amalendra Guha sir. Dr. Nagen Shoikia sir was also present there. Then Sar Sapori Sahitya Porishad was formed. One thing I want to make clear, that in 2011, when the census was going on, there was a resolution from Sar Sapori Sahitya Porishad that yes, we should go to the Sar Saporis and oppose anybody who wants that the people of Sar Sapori should not write Assamese as their mother tongue. As you know, and everybody who are conscious enough in Assam knows that on 19 February 2011, I was attacked by some Bengali chauvinists in one village, Jugirpam, near Borpeta town. Whatever this may be, we are still working, and we have published more than 50 books till now. We are publishing one magazine, and every year we are presenting 2 awards. One award is in the name of Ismail Hussain Senior, who was a bridge between the Bengal origin Assamese Muslim and the indigenous Assamese community, and another in the memory of Umar Ali, who were killed by some miscreants during the language movement in 1971 in Kharupetia. He was a peasant, but he sacrificed his life for Assamese language. Actually, Sar Sapori Sahitya Porishad has been trying to work as a bridge between the indigenous Assamese community and the Bengal origin Assamese Muslim community, but we don't know how far we have been successful.
I have no doubt that you have been successful to a great extent, and thank you for doing whatever we are doing. I think we all, on behalf of everyone, nobody is going to disagree with that. We really admire your work. So that is the reason I wanted to keep on quizzing and picking your brains on this. And I think this deserves an entirely different panel, but thank you for sharing all of that. I want to come to Pahiba after that on the writing process. Please tell us a little bit how I interfered in the writing process and how you dealt with my incredible amount of demands to revise the story.
First of all, you have already mentioned one thing, that you read my story in a handwritten way. Yeah, that's true. Because this story was written much before I started writing using my laptop. Yeah, I wrote using pen and paper long back. And definitely, it was on your demand, I must say. Maybe much before the concept of this anthology, even before that, because you liked the stories. We talk a lot over a cup of tea, coffee, whatever. We talk a lot. During our conversation, maybe someday I told this issue, we discussed a lot, then you said that you should write this. You just forced me to write it.
We were talking about childhood crushes.
Yeah, you remember very well. We were talking about childhood crushes. Right. That was the topic of our conversation that day. Anyway, I wrote a story. Then after, I don't know, maybe after 2 months, maybe after 1 year, I don't remember exactly, but the concept of the anthology came into mind, and you forced me to send it to you. And you started reading as an editor. And I thought that this is not enough. I must brush up my story, and I started revising the story, rewriting the story. And yeah, I must admit, you helped me a lot by encouraging and by being an editor. Later, this story was published in Goryohi, the Assamese literary magazine. But before it was published in Goryohi, you read it, and you told that, why are you so brutal? Why did you killed Motilal Jain in such a brutal way? So you should not kill him in this way. So this was something interesting. I enjoyed writing for you. I enjoyed discussing the writing process. And you wanna tell me about the challenges too, or
if you want to talk about the challenges, maybe you can talk very briefly about that, please.
Well, the most challenging point was there are so many stories. It was very difficult to write a short story. It's actually a very long story. So I thought a novel is demanded. I thought that the whole story. So this is one of the challenges, one only. So let's, as you said, I should be brief. So this is one thing. And but I must repeat that rewriting the story really helped me. Rewriting, revising, these things really help. And I have the habit of rewriting sometimes, not always.
Yeah, and I have actually, just for the panel, Pahiba and I discuss our stories, and one thing that I have learned, Judy and Sanjeev, both of you are my friends. One thing I have learned by working with different editors is that the rewriting process is extremely rewarding. And this is what I keep on telling. I wish we had good editors in Assam who would tell us, I'm not going to publish this. You better revise this, make this character strong, change this ending, and have quarrels with us. I want to have those literary quarrels. And I'm glad to say that I have these quarrels sometimes with Pahiba. She has read some of the very early drafts of, I think, Noikonetia Duret, also my Assamese novel.
Thank you. Before giving a reply to your question, I just want to say that my stories are mostly based on subjective interpretation, as Hafizda has read his poem. So in the initial period of my writing, I have used only my subjective interpretations in my writing styles. So maybe during that time, I don't have that much of experience of how you can develop a balanced story for the general readers. So in case of my writing style, I just include the characters and then try to give the narratives which I have found from them on. Okay, so I don't want to put my interpretation now. I mean, if I want to say that how I'm writing during this period in between 2017 to 2020. So now I'm only using the narratives which I have found from the characters from the field, exactly from the field. I mean, if I'm having a conversation with a person and after 2-3 months, if I want to use that character for my story, then I don't want to interpret my views or I don't want to mix my views with the character's opinion. So I used to do that, in a pure manner. So That is the first thing I want to explain. The second thing is that I came from a village, so whenever I whenever I used to go to my village, I have found lots of stories, lots of characters from my surrounding. Maybe I don't want to use them in some stories. Maybe I want to keep them for my memories and then want to reuse them for future. So that is one of the positive side, which I didn't feel that till 2016 I didn't feel that my village can be a source for my stories. But now I feel that the most interesting field for my stories is actually my village. So that is the second point I want to explain. And the third point is that now I want to balance my subjective interpretation with the objective one. So I don't want to put my ideological experience directly in my stories. I just want to explain it from different characters, which I have encountered in different spaces. So I want to explain those stories which are very, very pure in nature. Maybe for that the language may be changed. For example, the language which we used to write in our stories. For example, in case of Sanjeev Da, he had a particular language, especially the Doromia language and all. So in my case, I don't have that till 2016, which I feel now. But in case of today, if I want to introduce myself as a writer, then I want to give an explanation for myself that I have a language from Ujoni Ahom, Upper Assam, which is very, very pure in case of colloquial language. And from my village, from Hibohagor, from Sibsagar, it's a very peculiar kind of language. For example, if I want to say if I want to give an example from my side, Dingitu kyo beka koriaso. Okay, so ami sadharanতে when in case in our general form we don't use that language in Guwahati. Okay, so that kind of language is now I used to feel that those kind of languages can be used for my stories. So that's why some of the stories, for example, if I want to give some examples, for instance, the story on Gund, the smell, the odor, which I have written in 2017, and also Tulum Gundum Kagozor now. So in these two stories, I have used pure language from my village, from Ujoni Ahom.
Thank you. And I think, Judy, by doing that, you're actually aligning yourself with a very long tradition in Assamese literature where writers have used local dialects. I mean, I think actually Nirbama Borgo have done it in Paraghor Hiparaghor. There is Dotal Hati Uekwa Hauda by Mamuni Roy Goswami, where you get the dialect. Even Hafiz does sometimes have done it in his poetry. He has used the Assamese dialect. And many others have used dialect, right? Writing in dialects, writing in languages that are not constitutionally acknowledged, but are still languages, is a long tradition in Assamese literature. Descriptions are in regular standard Assamese, but you use the dialogues to bring out the gritty realism. And I also am very interested in see where your writing is going now, from engaging at the metaphorical level to actually the gritty, realistic level, because I think as a geographer you have done so much field work, so I think that is bringing a lot of change in the approach, right?
That's the most important thing actually. I have missed it. Thank you for giving me a remembrance. I mean, as a geographer, I have traveled a lot and I have met lots of people from different experiences. For example, if I want to say that I have used lots of fieldwork in riverine areas, flood-affected areas, from shores also. So there are lots of data which I can use in my thesis, and those which I don't want to use for my thesis, I can use for stories. And there are lots of stories from tea gardens, but the thing is that I don't have that accessibility of using their language, the tea garden language, in case of my story. So I don't want to use, the narratives from the people which I have gathered from tea gardens in our original, the language which we use to explain in our day-to-day life. So I want to actually explain those kind of stories which I can explain in a more, valid way, so that the readers can understand. And the most important thing which I feel during this time is actually that the most of the readers for my stories are young generation. So they used to have, they are very interested in the stories which are related with the political dilemmas, which are also related with the affairs, breakups and all these things, the modern relationships. So I feel that I can extend this now for at least 2-3 years, and then I can go again to the metaphor kind of thing.
I think we need to create both at the both levels, in
both
levels,
level,
as well as the realist level. Sanjeev, you have heard a lot about the writing process of the various authors in the panel, and I really want to also remind our readers and audience that Sanjeev also uses the Dorangi dialect in his short stories. Again, that is a long tradition, as we talked about briefly in Assamese literature, of using dialects in fiction and sometimes in poetry as well. Could you talk about your writing process, not just about using dialect, but about writing fiction, because you are primarily a fiction writer?
Yes. Specifically, I would like to speak on the writing process of this story, 18 years. So the experiences I already shared with you, though I carried all these experiences of military activity and also sense of terror consciously and unconsciously in my mind. So later on, when I came to Guwahati for further studies, I tried to gather more information about such activities and secret killings and killings of ex-Alpha cadre by their own colleagues. So the first draft of this story was prepared in 2006. But as I was not satisfied, I kept it unpublished for 3 years. And I must say the act of revising repeatedly, that act I learned from Aruni Kashyap in my college days, long back. And in 2009, I modified it and it was almost rewritten. And challenge of this story was that since this such kinds of story was not at all new to Assamese readers, so it was very common news for them. So challenge was to transform a very common fact or news to an art form. So actually I tried to incorporate the story of Abhimanyu and the art form of traditional art form of Kulia Bhauria.
I think the most telling image in a short story is when all these Bhauriyas dressed up as different mythological characters are running for their life because they have been terrorized by the army. Is that right? I cannot forget that image. And I know that this is based on real experience.
Yes.
Right? God, the most hilarious moment probably in recent cinema, in Hindi cinema, is the moment in PK when the person dressed up as God Shiva is running around because the alien is chasing him. And every time that moment comes, I think about Sanjeev's story. People running across paddy fields, Hanuman and Kunkuna. Who are the characters? Could you remind us a little bit?
No, Abhimanyu was the main character.
Yeah, and all of the other people who were dressed
and other up. Vishnu,
Krishna, and all they're all running across for their life, because the army has, come and they're all terrified. Sanjeev, what are you working on right now?
Right now, I have recently wrote one story on Assam agitation on Saulkhua massacre that happened in 14 February 1983. Mm-hmm. So my second anthology of short stories